Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. Yes, for those watching live, this is a special episode, I guess you could say. We're coming on an hour earlier than usual. I know some of you folks will be jumping on at 12, wondering what the heck, it's a recorded copy now. Yeah, sorry. There's something unusual came up. We'll explain a little bit of that in a few minutes here. But thank you for joining at this time, and thank you for joining later if you're catching the recorded version. Use that comment stream. Those of you who have found us with the live broadcast early today, I see Sean of Vision checking in there. Send me questions, notes, ideas, I appreciate them all. Just try to keep things somewhat civil. If you want to swear at me and everything, go to X. That's where it belongs, and we have a lot of fun there. All right, so I got a good one coming up. I got Jason Clemens of the Fraser Institute is going to come on in a little while. They wrote a piece on the America 51 thing, just to add a little rationality to this. We had Prime Minister Carney meeting with Trump, and his elbows up went down, and but still that weird America 51 thing still comes up. So, just a little bit of rational talk about the realism of what that's all about. And as well, there'll be lots of other news and things to cover. So let's talk about, one of the things that's been a big subject lately, and independence, Western independence, and another facet of it. So if there's any identifiable group in Canada that'd be well served with the changes brought about through Western independence, it's our Indigenous citizens. I mean, it's undeniable the status quo is serving Indigenous communities terribly, and nothing short of some sort of radical action is going to change that. Neither Western independence nor a referendum held for independence violates treaty rights, by the way, though some people who are financially married to the current system love to spread that misconception. Consultation with Indigenous citizens, though, it is constitutionally required to make major changes in Canada, and it should be. But consent isn't required. We got to remember that. But what better means of consultation can there be, and consent anyways, than holding a general referendum? Western independence supporters must reach out to the Indigenous communities and foster independence support among them. I mean, the conditions on Western reserves are abhorrent. Thousands of citizens are living in abject poverty and horrific socioeconomic conditions. While there's some chiefs, bureaucrats, and lawyers, they find themselves very comfortably served under the current system. Most of the common citizens on reserves are living trapped in a cycle of dependency and misery. One of the best and unexpected developments with the current surge of support for Western independence is that it brought treaties into the sphere of public discussion. Advocates for the status quo have always liked trying to quell discussion of systematic reforms by howling that any attempt to change things would violate the treaties. Now, since most people both on and off reserves never actually read a treaty, these activists have gotten away with pulling the wool over people's eyes for a long time. When opponents to independence tried to claim independence was impossible due to the treaties, it drove people into actually going online and looking at those treaties for themselves. They're available, and they're surprisingly simple documents. Most of the text in the treaties is dedicated to defining the extent of the reserves. The treaties are all very clear in establishing that Indigenous bands are actually forever ceding all claims to the territories outside of those reserves. Unless a referendum is proposing to change reserve boundaries, it's not in conflict with the treaties. The treaties establish some other rights, such as offering small annual stipends to chiefs and council leaders and providing resources for agricultural development, whetstones, a certain amount of horses and such. The payment figures are clearly out of date, as are the aspirations of creating an agriculturally focused culture from Indigenous people. All the same, there aren't actually that many direct obligations placed on governments from within those treaties. No tax exemptions or housing obligations or funding for advocacy groups like the Assembly of First Nations. One ironic obligation entrenched within treaties was that the government was to provide education for Indigenous children. That clause was supported by the government and Indigenous leaders alike, as it was hoped at the time it would help the next generation of Indigenous kids to integrate productively with the modern world. Well, guess what that got them? That led to the creation of the residential school system, which ended poorly, to say the least. Today, Indigenous reserves are rife with crime and poverty. Corruption's rampant among Indigenous leadership groups, while decades of massive spending increases and payouts only appears to make things worse. The average Indigenous man in Alberta dies 19 years younger than the average non-Indigenous person. How bad does it have to get before serious changes are made? Well, the treaties can't be changed. Most of the regulations managing the government of the reserve system can. They're from the outdated and racist Indian Act. Acts are just legislation, and they can be changed at any time if politicians find the political will. Unfortunately, political cowardice is much more common than proactive political will. Independence could be the catalyst that finally breaks Indigenous people away from the Indian Act, which is killing them figuratively and literally. A new deal and new legislation could and would be created in an independent West. The deal must be made, though, with the participation of Indigenous citizens. They don't need another top-down patronizing approach, and they aren't going to be receptive to it. We must reach out to Indigenous citizens as equals and partners on the road to independence. They'll embrace the change if they can be convinced they can break them from the cycle of dependency and dejection they're in right now. To do this, we have to bypass the Indigenous leadership. They act as gatekeepers to the citizens on reserves and want to hide the terrible conditions. And indeed, I'm in the midst of a court challenge against the Siksika First Nation right now, as they're trying to charge me with trespassing for filming the conditions of their reserve from a public highway. Many in leadership positions in the Indigenous system are making a lot of money and keeping things just as they are. The Siksika were given $1.2 billion by Trudeau only a few years ago, yet the citizens are living in squalor. It's a little wonder the leadership doesn't want people seeing what's happening out there. The independence movement has many things to do and many priorities to sort out. One of those priorities, though, must be to bring Indigenous citizens into the independence fold. Independence offers them a bright future, but they have to be convinced of it. They've been fed bad bills of goods many times before. Indigenous citizens aren't adversaries of independence. They will be allies when the right case is made to them. All right, well, that's what got me started up. Let's check in about the news. Editor Dave Naylor. How's it going?
It's going well. I see you survived the big quilt show on the weekend. Any like horror stories?
No,
parties, drunken orgies,
well,
that sort of
all
stuff?
that happened, it was while Jane was staying in Red Deer at the hotel. I just show up for the setup, and then come back to tear down all the displays.
Well, you should be there selling your book.
I don't know if Jane's quilt business needs something as divisive as my political rhetoric on her table. So I'm supportive.
She's supportive, I guess. Yes, long-suffering as well.
That's right, the long-suffering Jane.
I might add. Another busy day on the news world. Aren't they always these days? Our story right now, not our story, our site is leading off with the arrest of a teacher in Saanich. Female teacher, and she's been allegedly having sex with all sorts of students out there. And the RCMP think there's more victims, and they'd like them to come forward. You haven't had your lunch yet, have you?
Not all of it.
Okay, so try and hold on to it. But Christia Freeland says she's bringing sexy back.
Oh boy. The gal who was picking her toes and
cutting her toenails in Parliament and pulling her underwear out of her ass. Yes, she says she's obviously still the Minister of Internal Trade, and she says internal trade is sexy, and she's going to bring the sexy back.
Oh, good. We've got so much to look forward to.
Oh,
this,
yes.
Repainted liberal organization.
Exactly. We got a good story on WestJet. They've been ordered to pay a former employee $65,000 a year's salary. They fired her when she wouldn't take the COVID vaccine shot. She claimed a religious exemption, and the company then dismissed her. So that could open the gates for a lot of people who were fired for not getting their vaccine, and so just be the first. A couple of months ago, there was a $10 million bounty from the U.S. on the head of an al-Qaeda rebel fighter in Syria. Well, that fighter won the war and expelled Assad and is now the leader of Syria. And he met with Trump, the guy whose government put a $10 million bounty on his head. Met him in Saudi Arabia today, and Trump's going to drop all the sanctions against Syria, which have been in place for 14 years. And give them a chance to try and build their rubble back up and
and build a nice new theocratic miserable place to slaughter everybody who doesn't follow their path of Islam. It's something to look forward to.
Something to look forward to. Our Jen Hodgson, just over your left shoulder there. I'm not sure if she's in the shot. She's working on a story. Mark Carney, first cabinet meeting today, says he's willing to make changes to the laws to get energy projects moving quickly. So says the right things, and then we'll see what he says coming out of cabinet. The new energy minister, Hodgson, says he's going to make a quick trip out west to test the waters. So we'll say, what do you think of the Carney cabinet?
The cabinet. I mean, it is just the same thing rebranded, so there's not much new. This isn't a new cabinet; it's a cabinet shuffle. I think most of us out here kind of like with the energy, you can tell from the tone. It's just more, we'll believe it when we see it, sort of.
Exactly.
But he's saying the right things. I guess it's.
Yep, give him the chance. I don't know about our idiot friend Gilbo being in charge of Canadian heritage, though. He could screw that up big time.
Well, yeah, and it sounds like a minor ministry, but I remember when Sheila Copps was in charge of heritage and she messed with national parks and everything. And if you put an imbecile or a lunatic in charge of any of those ministries, they can do damage. There's nowhere you can stick them where they aren't going to cause problems.
Yep, no kidding. And I guess the reason your show is being preempted is Derek Fildebrandt, our fearless leader, has an exclusive interview with Premier Danielle Smith coming up around over the lunch hour, and he's got a list of hard-hitting questions that will be put to the Premier, and we'll get that out on all our channels as soon as our wonder producer John gets it all fixed up. So look for that this afternoon.
Excellent. Yeah, I can understand being kicked aside if it's a matter of the Premier coming on. Though, I mean, boy, she should really schedule herself around my availability.
Exactly. You would think so. You think so, wouldn't you? So
speaking of which, you're going to abandon us for a little while.
I'm leaving. Yeah, leaving on a jet plane on Friday. Going to go over to Israel, do some poking around, see what's going on over there, and really looking forward to it. It should be a very interesting week in Israel.
Yeah, no. Amazing place. Envy you that. Right, just try not to get blown up.
I will do my best. I've downloaded an app which goes off with sirens every time a rocket is launched towards Israel. So it went off yesterday in the middle of the newsroom, and I've never heard the sound before. And and finally figured it out. Yeah, the wacky Houthis had launched a missile from Yemen into Israel, but it was shot down by Iron Dome. So
okay, well, be sure to bring spare shorts, I guess, in that case, in case you get a code brown.
I've got a few packed. Don't worry.
All right, thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Cory.
We will see you on the show when you get back.
Thank you.
Right on. All right, that is our news editor, Dave Naylor. Lots on the go. Like we said, and yes, he is traveling to the Holy Land to get a firsthand account on just that part of the world that's just got so much terrible stuff going on. And of course, we're writing and covering stuff, as he said, with Jen and others domestically as well. We are a news organization. Those stories are coming out fast, hard, and heavy. And the reason we can is because you guys have subscribed. So just that reminder, thank you very much to those who have subscribed already. And if you haven't yet, $10 a month, guys, $100 for a year, just like an old newspaper subscription, gets you past the paywall, funds things like this newsroom, this show, and our reporters all across the country. So we can cover these things. It's going to be interesting listening to Derek speaking to Premier Smith. I really don't know what the questions are going to be on that one. But, a good one-on-one with the Premier for a little while. That's the thing with independent media. We'll ask questions that the legacy media won't. We aren't as constrained as them, and that's what's important about what we do. So I see some of the comments. Cindy saying, save the ostriches. They're scheduled for a cull in the next 4 days. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen that. The Western Standard has had a story on that and been covering it. There's an ostrich farm in BC. It's run out of appeals. There's fears of, I think it's the bird flu or something like that. And they're going to kill 400 of these ostriches on there, even though they are healthy. The over-management of our agricultural area, it's just one of so many areas where Canada just unfortunately doesn't serve consumers or businesses very well at all. I mean, going farther, some of these discussions, if we're going to be efficient, if we're going to do better for ourselves, I'm hoping. I mean, I don't hold high hopes with the Liberal government. You still hope for the best. And one of the areas that they've talked about through the election, but didn't have the courage to outright say, but when they talked about removing interprovincial boundaries to trade, cabinet members and Carney himself are saying that still right now. Well, one of the big ones, and when it comes to agriculture, which is huge, is Canada's supply management system. Are we finally going to get to the point where we can get rid of that Soviet-style management of our dairy and poultry and egg industries? We had that in Alberta, too. There was a man who's been charged, I guess, for selling eggs, the crime of selling eggs. We got so many other issues that are so important, but they actually sent a number of RCMP officers to this man's farm because in Canada, it is in Alberta illegal to have more than 300 chickens and to try to sell eggs. Apparently, he had access to 1,000 of them. What a monster. Could you imagine if people were just able to sell eggs and raise chickens whenever they pleased? Oh, the chaos and disorder. And I'm glad we have the state here to protect us from ourselves. Well, either way, it's a bizarre world. Let's just talk a bit about then. We're going to bring in my guest and talk about trying to bring some rationality into a strange and irrational thing, and that's the US 51 thing. We've got Jason Clemens from the Fraser Institute to talk to us. I read a recent piece on the America 51 thing, and I just unplugged my earpiece. Pardon me, Jason. I got you again. So thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So we recently saw one of the first things Prime Minister Carney did was went down and met with President Trump. I think a challenging task for anybody to try and do. It doesn't matter who you are. You don't know what you're dealing with. Um, and the America 51 thing, I mean, it didn't dominate the talk, but Trump couldn't help but talk a little more about it. And what I appreciate is you wrote at least just to give a rational breakdown on what this whole concept means and how realistic it is. Could you kind of lay out what you guys wrote on that?
Sure. So we really tried to take two angles. There's probably 40 angles of what's wrong with President Trump's comments, but we tried to attack two of them. So the first one is just the crass politics, which is the Republican Party, of which President Trump is the leader, would never, ever allow Canada to become the 51st state because it would provide a distinct advantage to the Democratic Party. So what we mean by that is if you look at the congressional seats that Canada would get, or the 2 Senate seats, or the electoral votes that we would get in the presidential election, in all 3 of those cases, it would hand the Democrats an advantage over the Republican Party. And so just in kind of basic terms, you'd have to divide Canada into at least 4 states to gerrymander a system where it would be a wash. In other words, where the Republicans and the Democrats would look at Canada joining the United States as a political wash, not advantaging one party over the other. So just in that kind of crass, basic political vein, the president, excuse my phrasing, he's just out to lunch, that his own party would never allow this. The second thing we try to do is actually look at some policy areas where the president keeps saying that the U.S. has an advantage over Canada. And he on every one of those fronts, he's just fundamentally wrong. So one of the areas we looked at in the piece was federal taxation. The president is wholly misunderstanding that the United States' tax advantage over Canada is largely at the state versus provincial level. If you look at a number of taxes, Canada versus the United States at the federal level, we are actually fairly competitive. It's at the provincial level where we're just not competitive with the US states. Now, part of that is because their federal government is much larger than our federal government, and our provinces are generally larger than their states. But the idea that Canada joining the US and getting their federal tax rates and keeping our provincial tax rates, we would actually be less tax competitive than we are right now. So again, the president is just mistaken. And then there's about 3 or 4 other areas where Canada does have a distinct advantage right now, and joining the states would not be advantageous. Now, there are some other areas where there would be advantages. And so having a discussion about a customs union or freer trade between the 2 countries, I think those are definitely avenues to pursue and discuss. But the president's continued disrespecting of Canada as a sovereign nation doesn't help have those conversations or set us up for a fulsome discussion of how to improve free trade between the 2 countries. And again, going back to our first point, his own party would never allow Canada as the 51st state.
And well, I guess, as you said, in the crass political end of it, I mean, the Democrats would see an advantage then if there was a bunch, but I couldn't see an appetite on the Democrat Party if they had a president coming in that they would want to jump in and try and annex Canada or have Canada join. So, I mean, this really is a non-starter of a discussion in a way.
No, absolutely. In fact, if it was a Democratic president with control of the House and the Senate, I can guarantee you that the Republicans in the Senate would filibuster to hold up Canada becoming the 51st state, because again, it would hand a decisive electoral advantage to the Democratic Party, particularly when it comes to the House of Representatives and then the presidential race. Because Canada as one state would be the second largest state behind only California. So it would get a reasonable amount of congressional seats and a fairly large electoral college vote for the president, both of which would favor the Democratic Party, which, again, just in terms of crass politics, the Republicans would never allow.
So I'm going to ask you the impossible question. I have to. What do you think the motivation of President Trump is in constantly picking at this? I mean, he's a bizarre man, but he's not completely foolish necessarily. You think there's some sort of tactic behind this?
I am not nearly smart enough to psychoanalyze President Trump. I think that there's a wonderful book by H.R. McMaster, who's now down at the Stanford Hoover Institution. He was President Trump's national security advisor in the first term. And he really does lay out the chaotic nature of the White House and President Trump. I think the generous way to explain it is that he's not disciplined. The president is just not disciplined in his communication, which oftentimes leads to chaos. I mean, one only needs to look at how the tariff regime has been rolled out, paused, reversed, rolled out. I mean, the word chaos, I think, is quite reflective of the way the president has approached the issue of tariffs. So again, I think one that the president oftentimes makes general comments, and when you dig into the specifics, he's actually quite wrong. So I think you have this combination of an undisciplined communicator, perhaps an undisciplined thinker. He's certainly smart and accomplished. There's no doubt about that. But that doesn't mean that he's disciplined in the way that he thinks and the way that he works through decisions. And I think maybe the third thing is he has a fairly brash personality, and I don't think he is reflected. In fact, I'm convinced that he is not reflected on the fact that the way that he has treated Canada breaks more than 100 years of tradition in terms of the close, very unique relationship of Canada and the United States. We did a piece documenting presidential speeches about Canada. And what you see consistently is the Americans referring to us as special partners with the United States, that we're more than neighbors, the uniqueness of that relationship. And, you know, in less than 3 months, President Trump has really historically undermined that very special relationship. So I think his brashness in this case has amplified the problems. But beyond that, I think we're getting into some psychoanalysis where I don't have comparative advantage, to use the economic term.
No, I understand. When you're talking about somebody as difficult to analyze, no matter how you look at it. I mean, wherever somebody sits, though, I would hope, I guess, the election's over. Whatever you may think of Carney or Trump, I mean, just for the sake of pragmatism, Trump has, I guess, maybe political Tourette syndrome. He just opens his mouth and whatever is going to come out is going to come out. But he does seem, maybe I'm reading into it, but a little more subdued, maybe a little more receptive. I mean, as you said, it's a very important relationship for both countries. I'm sure people have quietly been trying to get President Trump to understand this. Do you think there's a chance that a good dialogue can return between the two nations?
All I can convey, I think, is what's being reported in places like the Wall Street Journal and others, where there seems to be a real contest of ideas within the White House, between one camp, which would be largely headed by the Treasury Secretary, Mr. Bissett, who, I mean, if you're following the news, I mean, he has been at the lead of trying to ratchet down the tension with China. He's at the lead of getting the tariffs lowered and suspended with China. He was certainly, at the forefront of the 90-day pause. There's a second camp, though, with people like Peter Navarro, who's an advisor to the president, who has some very frankly bizarre views of trade. The Commerce Secretary is in that camp, where they really do think about trade as someone has to win and someone has to lose, which, just on scratching the surface, is not about. I mean, trade is about two parties winning, that you're both made better off because you've traded something. So I think for most of us, we're cheering quietly for the Secretary of the Treasury, Bissett, for him to be victorious, which it looks like he is gaining more and more momentum and influence within the White House. And certainly it looks like they're backing down. I think the rally in both the bond market and the equity market is saying there's an expectation that that's the direction the U.S. is going to move in terms of ratcheting down the tariffs and moving towards more free trade agreements. Now, I think the one hiccup here, and it was interesting, President Trump's reaction to the agreement with the UK. There is no agreement. It's a framework to get to an agreement. And these things take months at best, if not years. And so, President Trump's idea that we're going to get a great trade deal in the next 6 to 8 weeks, I think the best we can hope for is we get a good trade framework. And we get some recognition, I think, particularly in sectors like the auto sector, where there's such a high level of integration that the idea of 25% tariffs just makes no sense. And then secondly, the United States needs our natural resources. The idea that, and what he said to Prime Minister Carney, that they don't need our natural resources, again, it was added to a very long list of mistakes the president has made.
Well, and I would think, as this kind of trickles down and hits the pocketbooks of President Trump's supporters, the realities of agricultural producers dependent on potash trade coming down to the United States, or the energy products that we trade back and forth. People's minds change. Your ideology gets set aside when you suddenly realize you have less money than you had to begin with. So I guess we could just hope that President Trump can react positively to that and realize that, boy, okay, we can. He can claim that he's doing it for the right reasons or whatever he likes, just as long as he starts getting rational, hopefully, on the trade agreements.
No, I think it's a great insight. Part of this, if we think about the lag between when you change policy and when it actually shows up in the economy, depending on the nature of the policy, it's anywhere between 6 to 12 months, roughly. And so if we think about that, the president is facing a midterm election next November, he really does not have all that much time. Particularly, you look at some of the data coming out of the United States, that their economy clearly is slowing. The global economy is slowing. The president's party will be in trouble if they're in a recession come the beginning of next year. And so getting trade resolved, getting certainty improved, in other words, reducing uncertainty so that businesses and entrepreneurs can make decisions about investment and expanding their business or starting a new business, getting that uncertainty down by resolving the tariff situation needs to be done expeditiously. Otherwise, this is going to drag the economic consequences of the uncertainty and the policy mistakes is going to drag well into 2026, which then again will influence the midterm elections. And President Trump will be in a very different position in terms of his presidency and what he can do if his party, the Republican Party, loses the Senate and or the House of Representatives and the Congress.
Well, I appreciate you guys, just bring it up, just to add a voice of reason to kind of a weird, unreasonable time. And the Fraser Institute's had a long and fantastic history of providing us with a lot of great information on issues and things. So before I let you go, where can people find your work, and how can they support the Fraser Institute?
It's FraserInstitute.org, and we're always looking for donations and supporters to help us do the work that we do independently. So I appreciate the plug. The website's the best place to get our work, and there's a link on there if you want to donate and help us out. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I had to give you a plug at least. I use you as a resource for my columns all the time. I've got you guys are fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much again for joining me today, Jason, and I hope we get to talk again sometime soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great, thanks. So that was, again, Jason Clemens with the Fraser Institute. And again, a good, voice of reason, and they've long been one, voice of free markets, trade, healthcare. We've got such a bombastic period. Whether you like Trump, you don't like Trump. His nature is just the bull in the china shop, and it's not going to change. But hopefully we can just try to add reason to it whenever and however we can. As I said, I'm not terribly optimistic about Carney, but I hope for the best, at least for the short term. Independence is the direction I tend to point, but in the meantime, it could be years and years away yet. And I just want as good a policy as we can have for the West and for Canada. I don't have a problem with Canada. I just want to change the agreement and the borders. That's all. Simple, right? Well, not so simple, but gotta have those discussions. I thought the tone was different between Carney and Trump in that meeting. A lot of people pointed out it sure was a more subdued Carney. He did his all campaign on the big bizarre elbows up weirdness where they were doing the chicken dance and lineups and everything. It seemed to work for them, though. One of the best things you can always campaign on politically, we're going to talk about crass politics again, is an external threat. So Carney and his campaign strategists, they recognized and identified what they felt was an external threat and something that felt like a threat to Canadians, and they capitalized on it. And they framed themselves as the defenders against that. And people lost concern over a lot of the domestic issues, or forgot at least what was going on, because they were too worried about what was going on there. I see Kenzie Kraken, a commenter, saying, Canadians took it far too seriously. Well, you see, there's what I'm talking about, the consequences, though. When you've got the leader of your largest ally, largest trade partner, typically close friend, integrated countries, being so belittling, even when I know it was Trudeau, I didn't like him either, but refusing to offer the degree of respect that this is a leader of a sovereign nation next door. And then into the election, when you do that 51st state talk, and as we discussed, it's just not going to happen, so it's not there. It shook up the populace. And it got people upset. It got people who were indifferent to things suddenly liking this elbows up idea. So as much as people took it too seriously or not, they did take it seriously, and it had an impact on our election very directly. Now we got the whole same gang of clowns back in, overspending, sending us deeper into debt. They might even actually turn this into a majority. As J.R. Michael saying, a commenter, create a crisis. And it's true. We've seen that historically. I mean, thankfully, I guess, some of the past crises with bigger countries, the way they save their butts is to start a war, a literal war. We haven't gotten into that, thankfully, because our military is not up to snuff. It's another one of those discussions. There's something I don't get out of Carney, with Canada in general. If you don't like Trump, you don't like him making points. Well, let's get some of the ones where he's right, because he is right on some things. As I was saying before, we brought Jason on. Supply management. Canada's policies are a terrible, terrible policy, and they are an affront to trade. And they're a problem with us getting trade deals with countries all over the world, not just the United States. And the other one is our military contribution. I mean, if we're going to be a part of NATO, people say we shouldn't be a part, fine. But either way, we don't spend enough. We committed. We said we're going to spend 2% of our GDP on the military to be a part of that organization. We're at something like 1.3, and it's terrible. We've got outmoded equipment. We got a military overloaded with DEI clowns, a very dysfunctional military. Maybe some good people within it, but they're struggling, and we're certainly not holding up our end on things. And Trump is right when he says that they are the ones serving as the military for Canada, because they have been. It's not Canada's military that keeps us from being invaded by Russia or China or Guatemala, for crying out loud. There's no country we could defend ourselves against, not with our military, not with our antiquated mess. So why can't, Carney can increase spending all over the place, masses of increased spending, but won't commit to reaching 2% on defense until 2030. With a stroke of a pen, he'll spend billions on every other bunch of crap, but not on the military. You wonder why, what's threatening the sovereignty of this country? It's not Trump and his babbling. It's the Liberals and driving this nation to the ground. That's why, again, I don't think we can save Canada, but we can save the west side of it. Let's look at some of those things, right? Honda, this has been the big news thing, because billions and billions of dollars, they're supposed to be building electric vehicles here in Ontario. Ooh, Ford's upset. You can tell he jiggles a certain way. Yes, Premier Ford, all mad because they went and promised billions in subsidies, him arm in arm with Trudeau, holding hands, saying, Honda, please take the tax dollars of the West and we'll give them to you so you can build electric vehicles. And they did, and they took it, and then they said, we're not going to do that. Looks like Volkswagen's doing the same. Why? Because EV vehicles are crap. People don't want them. It's not... They've been telling us there's a market for these things for over 10 years. It hasn't developed. The closest thing we've got to a market for them, ironically, are Teslas. And you go out in the streets and you see there's still, 4% of the vehicles, 5% are electric? It's not there. It might come one day, but it's not there yet. And this shows some of the train wreck that we're heading towards with the Carney government, because they haven't backed down on illegalizing the sale of regular vehicles by 2035. They're going to make it illegal to go out and buy a brand new car. You know how much that's screwing up our whole manufacturing and supply chain setup? And why? Because, magically, we're all going to be driving electric vehicles by then. Here we are with battery plant after EV plant after electric bus plant failing. Here we are with energy projects being bunged up in regulation and consultation and environmental crap, so we can't get those done. We're getting into a terrible, impossible situation. Even if somehow they came up with a magical electrical vehicle manufacturer, and they switched us all into those EVs, and then they spent $20,000 a house among tens and tens of millions of people to upgrade their charging systems in their houses so they can charge those vehicles, our power grid would collapse. We don't have nearly the generating capacity to keep up with the pipe dreams of these electric vehicles. It is so unrealistic on so many fronts, but they won't back down on it. And you want to know why? Wild Rose just hit it in the comments there. Kickbacks and backroom deals. It's the only thing that makes sense anymore. When you're one of the ones who's tied in with one of the suppliers, when you're one of the ones who sits in the middle and grabs your pound of flesh as that subsidy goes from your pocket to some other clown's pocket on one of these plants. We're getting screwed, people. And it's not going to get any better until, we got to change the system. It's the system that's broken. That's the problem. But either way, look at the things we got to look forward to. Here's another one, cricket farms, right? That's a beauty. Yeah, millions of dollars. Again, we're talking about subsidies. Went into, Trudeau gave that out to a cricket farm in Ontario for human consumption. Yes, because that's going to be the future world. We were all going to eat crickets. We're going to eat bugs. That's the future. So let's take millions of dollars from productive people, from productive industries, from productive businesses, and stick it in a cricket farm. Guess what? They went broke. Why? Because nobody wants to eat the friggin' crickets. But somebody took millions of dollars, didn't they? It's a racket, and we're getting badly treated out of this whole thing. So now there's that. Now let's go on to the other areas that are messing with us. We're looking into another year of this strike. Speaking of entitlement and stupidity, Canada Postal Workers are saying they're going to go on strike again. They held us all hostage just last winter as we were approaching Christmas, went on strike for over a month. And what they're fighting against was automation, fighting against ending of home delivery. What we've got is a government version of Blockbuster Video holding us hostage. Guys, they're obsolete. And they're going on strike again. This has got to be the dumbest union on the planet. After these idiots went on their last strike. You got to think about it. If you're a postal worker, you're doing pretty good. You're doing the job of a flyer delivery kid. You're making a middle-class income with full benefits, a good pension, good vacation time. And yes, they could see the light at the end of the tunnel is going black because they're working in an obsolete industry. They should be trying to transition themselves to get realistic about it. But instead, they want to grab more money and go on strike and somehow think we can maintain this obsolete industry. You don't mail letters anymore. We don't get bills in the mail anymore. We get flyers and junk. The growing area, our packages in the private market is eating that because Canada Post screwed it up. After their last strike, the government had to bail them out over $1 billion friggin' dollars, and they're still losing billions on top of that. So the government will keep bailing them out because they like to claim, look at the mandate of Canada Post. It's an independent crown corporation. It's self-funding. It's not. It's losing billions, and we as taxpayers end up having to bail it out. And now they're threatening to strike again. Those idiots. They're idiots. But I guess, again, if they were brilliant, they wouldn't be postal monkeys, would they? It's time this time, guys. If they go on strike, cut this down. 1 day a week delivery. No more home delivery. Lay off 80% of these clowns. They're ripping us off. I'm sorry, guys. You had a good gig. You ran it as long as you could. And then when the end came close, you got too greedy. Now you're just going to end up out of a job. And it's your fault. And the union's fault. Because you listen to those hammerheads who are heading the unions, pushing and pushing and pushing for you to go after what isn't reasonable. Likewise, we got the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees. They just had a big strike vote. Yeah, civil service. Here we are with the economy slowing down. You want to know what they want? They've already been offered 11%. They want 24% raises. 24% for these civil service workers in Alberta. Who's getting a 24% raise? But they're going to go on strike, and you know what? They'll get it. Because they hold us hostage. We've made ourselves... This is the problem when we make ourselves dependent on government to provide services. because then you give a monopoly to these civil service unions, and then they gouge us and charge us far, far more than what they're worth, and they get away with it. In Alberta as well, the teachers are talking about going on strike again too. Oh, those poor dears. Oh, darlings. Let's see, teacher. What are they capping out now? 115,000 a year, plus a few months off, plus full benefits, fantastic pension. And you're looking to go on strike again. Talk about spoiled. I mean, you got to remember a lot of teachers, they didn't go into it because they loved teaching. They went into it because they got a degree in gender studies or African poetry or something stupid and unmarketable. And eventually they got tired of making happy faces and lattes at Starbucks, upgraded, got a teacher certificate because they wanted a good pension and a job. But it didn't mean they loved the children or loved the job. And it's not an easy job. It's a difficult job. And it's a very, very important job. Some of the teachers out there are probably worth $200,000 a year, but a whole lot of them are just mailing it in to get a good pension and have their summers off. And now they're striking too. They're holding your kids hostage. We got to break these monopolies. The unions are raping us, guys. They are bleeding you dry. And the only way, like anything else, to solve this, because organized labor is a right, and it should be, but there's got to be competition. Giving monopoly services, then you're always going to get it, whether it's a private monopoly or a government monopoly. So yes, we're looking now at postal workers, provincial civil servants, and teachers are all talking about striking too. Last year, it was the federal civil servants because we needed more CRA people to get on the phone and talk in unintelligible English to tell you why they've screwed up your tax return for the 15th time. We got a bleak thing to look ahead to. Somebody's saying, can a sovereign country of Alberta outlaw unions asking for a friend? Well, I hope not. As I said, organized labor is a right. I don't want to see the unions outlawed, but they have to be held in check. Banning replacement workers, for example, that's what empowers them. That's one of the reasons we've had all these federal strikes. Because Justin Trudeau tried to buy union love and NDP love, which kind of worked, I guess. The NDP supported the Liberals in this election. But by bringing in legislation banning replacement workers in federally regulated industries, so you gave all of the power to the unions, all of it, and left the companies, even these are private companies, but they're in federally regulated industries, but they're defenseless. The union can hold them completely hostage. As long as they got enough savings, they can shut the business down, make it illegal for that business to operate until the business caves to whatever the union maggots are asking for. Chances are the business will just close and go broke. Good deal. But, you know, we've got a lot to look forward to. I mean, WestJet, there's that other one. That's an interesting one. Dave mentioned that in the news update. So a Calgary employee got fired for refusing the COVID vaccine. Now, see, again, I'm not anti-vaccination, but I am pro-choice. Forcing somebody to take a medication is wrong under any circumstance. And the judges are starting to agree. We can see a lot of lawsuits now coming. So this person got fired. This was a person that got $65,000. I mean, this is years later. I'm sure that's not worth it. They'd rather just stayed employed. And this is an accountant, and she was working from home. Why were you forcing vaccination on somebody who's working from home anyway? This is a matter of control. This is a matter of overreaching HR and government policies, just trying to control every aspect of your life to force somebody to take a medication they didn't want to take when they're absolutely not putting anybody at risk by not having that vaccination. And now the courts are starting to turn around. We could see quite a flood of this because there were a lot of military members who lost their positions. There were all sorts of government workers and private market workers who lost their jobs because they didn't want to get vaccinated. Make the case against them, but it's their bloody choice, especially when it came to COVID, because it didn't prevent transmission. So it didn't make a difference. You couldn't make that case. You're putting me more at risk because you didn't get vaccinated. No, it's not like measles or polio or some of the others. The COVID jab didn't stop transmission. So you didn't have that case to make. But we got to keep working on these things, folks. Finally, that last one, which is kind of bizarre. And people kind of laugh at it, but but it's not funny. Dave was talking about that teacher, it sounds like in BC, who was sleeping with a whole pile of the male students. And you look at the picture, she's not a bad looking woman. And I got every guy remembers being 15, 16 years old and you're a hormone overloading lunatic. And if any decent looking woman allows you to at that point, you're more than happy to jump on. But, you give the nod and the wink to the boys and then you would scream bloody murder if it was a male teacher with girls. Look, guys, it's wrong both times. And if you want to create a bunch of confused, dysfunctional young men, we allow that sort of thing where a person in a position of power and authority, which is a teacher, to bed them, even if they felt they were willing or that it was a good idea at the time. So I hope, if indeed that's what was going on over there, that she faces some very, very serious charges, because this is a serious incident. And we got to watch when we nod and wink at some things that sound like, it's funny, but in reality, it's causing very real damage. We entrust teachers, we entrust them with our kids, and they shouldn't be doing anything like that with them. All right, so as was said earlier, yes, in a little bit, Derek is going to be interviewing Premier Smith. I don't know what they're going to talk about. It's going to be an interesting interview nonetheless, I'm certain, and it will be posted online as soon as the editing and such can be done. So I don't know, within the next couple or a few hours, I believe. So thank you all for tuning in today, guys. I'll be back on Friday at 11 a.m. Tonight, the pipeline will be on. And of course, watch all our channels for that exclusive interview with Premier Danielle Smith here at the Western Standard. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next one.